The gymnasium smelled like sweat and old rubber, the kind of place where egos got tested and reputations were built or shattered. It was 6:30 at Naval Special Warfare Command in Coronado, and the morning light filtered through high windows, casting long shadows across the matted floor. Three Bud-S candidates stood in a loose semicircle, their postures radiating the kind of confidence that came from surviving Hell Week and believing they'd earned the right to say anything to anyone. The woman they'd cornered was small, maybe 5'5", with dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun and eyes that held something these kids hadn't learned to recognize yet. She wore plain PT gear, no insignia visible, nothing to indicate rank or qualification. One of the candidates, a broad-shouldered kid from Texas with a jawline that could cut glass, leaned in closer. "You lost, ma'am. The yoga studio's across base." His buddies laughed, the sound echoing off the cinder block walls. The woman didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there with her hands loose at her sides, weight balanced on the balls of her feet in a way that should have told them something. "I'm exactly where I need to be," she said quietly, her voice carrying a West Virginia accent softened by years of briefings in windowless rooms. The second candidate, lean and wiry with a New York edge to his voice, stepped closer. "This is a restricted training facility. NSW personnel only." "Maybe you should—" He didn't get to finish. The woman moved, not fast enough to seem aggressive, not slow enough to give them time to react. Her hand came up in a deflection that sent the New Yorker stumbling sideways, his balance broken by a technique so subtle he couldn't explain what happened. The Texan lunged forward instinctively, and she sidestepped, used his momentum against him, put him face down on the mat with one arm twisted behind his back at an angle that made him gasp. The third candidate froze, suddenly aware that something had gone very wrong with their morning. The whole thing took maybe 5 seconds. The woman released the Texan, stepped back, and that's when the door to the adjacent office opened. A Master Chief walked out, coffee mug in hand, and stopped dead. His eyes went wide, not with surprise at the scene but with recognition. He straightened instantly, came to attention in a way that made all three candidates' blood run cold. "Commander Cale," he said, voice tight with respect. The woman nodded once, her expression unchanged. "Master Chief." The title hung in the air like a bomb. Commander Vesper Cale had spent 14 years earning that rank, and the trident pinned to her dress uniform told a story these candidates would spend years trying to understand. She'd completed Bud-S Class 297, one of 3 women to make it through that particular crucible, and the only one who'd gone on to pass Green Team selection. Her call sign, Raptor, had been earned during a direct action mission in the Helmand province where she'd pulled 2 wounded teammates through 400 meters of open ground under sustained fire. But none of that was visible now, standing in a gym with 3 kids who just learned the hardest lesson the teams could teach. Never assume you know who's standing in front of you. The Master Chief gestured sharply. "On your feet, all of you." The candidates scrambled up, faces red with shame and adrenaline. The Texan's arm hung at an odd angle, not dislocated but definitely strained, and he cradled it against his chest. Cale watched them with the kind of calm that came from seeing combat in 14 countries, from making calls that put lives on the line and living with the consequences. "Names," she said simply. They gave them, voices subdued now, all the bravado bled out. "Martinez, Duchesne, Park." Good names, the kind that showed up on memorial walls if you weren't careful, if you let ego override training. "You know what you did wrong?" Cale asked. None of them answered immediately. Finally, Park, the one who'd frozen, spoke up. "We made assumptions, ma'am." "You made assumptions," Cale agreed. "In the field, assumptions get people killed. You see someone, you assess, you don't posture, you don't peacock. You read the situation and act accordingly." She looked at each of them in turn. "What did you miss?" Duchesne swallowed hard. "Your stance, ma'am, your positioning. You were ready before we even moved. And you didn't react emotionally," Martinez added, his Texas drawl subdued now. "You stayed calm, used our aggression against us." Cale nodded. "The best operators aren't the ones who hit hardest. They're the ones who see 3 moves ahead and make violence look effortless. You've got the physical tools. Hell Week proved that. But if you can't control your ego, you'll never make it past Green Team." The Master Chief cleared his throat. "Commander Kale's here to observe advanced CQB rotations. She'll be evaluating candidates for potential pipeline progression." The weight of that statement settled over the three like a wet blanket. They just assaulted an evaluator, someone who could make or break their careers with a single report. Park looked like he might throw up, but Kale's expression didn't change. "You get one mistake," she said. "Everyone does. What matters is what you do after. You can spend the next 6 months being bitter, making excuses, telling yourselves I got lucky or used some cheap technique, or you can learn from this and become better operators." She turned to leave, then paused. "Martinez, get that arm looked at. Duchesne, work on your distance management. Park, trust your instincts faster. You saw the danger before your teammates did." She walked toward the office, and the Master Chief followed, leaving the three candidates standing in the middle of the mat, their world fundamentally altered. Later in the operations planning cell, Kale sat across from Captain Riker, the squadron commander, reviewing training schedules and upcoming deployment rotations. Riker was old-school SEAL, with 26 years in and scars that mapped a career spent in the worst places on Earth. "Heard you had an interesting morning," he said, not looking up from his tablet. "Three phase candidates thought they owned the gym. They'll learn." "You go easy on them," Kale considered the question. "I gave them exactly what they needed. They're good kids, strong, fast, but they've got that post-Hell Week invincibility complex. Someone needed to check it before it gets them killed downrange." Riker nodded, finally meeting her eyes. "JSOC wants you in Virginia next month. SMU cross-training package. Delta's running a new urban combat protocol and they want NSW perspective." "What's the tasking?" "Hostage rescue in denied environments. They're developing new entry techniques for hardened structures. Want our maritime approach integrated into their methodology." Kale leaned back. She'd worked with Delta before, during a joint operation in Syria that had gone sideways fast. Good operators, different culture, but the same core mission. "Timeline?" she asked. 4 weeks of instruction, then a joint exercise at an undisclosed facility, probably somewhere in the Carolinas. Riker slid a folder across the desk. "Full briefs in there. You'll be working with their newest troop commander, someone named Hatcher, supposed to be sharp." Kale opened the folder, scanned the first page. The mission parameters were complex, the kind of operation that required perfect synchronization between air, ground, and support elements. "I'll need to bring someone from my team, someone who can translate our methodology into their framework. Take who you need. JSOC's covering all expenses." The conversation shifted to logistics, equipment requirements, and training schedules. But Kale's mind was already moving ahead, thinking through the personnel she'd need, the challenges of integrating two different special operations cultures, and the reality that every training evolution was preparing for something real, somewhere in the world where people needed help and conventional forces couldn't reach. Outside, Martinez, Duchesne, and Park sat in the medical facility waiting room while a corpsman examined Martinez's shoulder. They didn't speak much, still processing what had happened. Finally, Duchesne broke the silence. "My dad told me about a female SEAL who pulled a hostage rescue in Somalia back in 2019. Single-handedly took down 3 militants in a confined space, got a Navy Cross for it. Never mentioned her name." Park pulled out his phone, started searching. "Commander Vesper Kale, Navy Cross, Silver Star, 2 Bronze Stars with V device. Class 297. Green Team Selection 2017. Multiple deployments to CENTCOM AOR." He scrolled further. "Jesus, she's got more combat experience than half the senior enlisted in the command." Martinez rotated his shoulder gingerly, wincing. "And we tried to intimidate her like she was some lost admin officer." "We're idiots," Duchesne said flatly. "Complete idiots." The corpsman came back with an ice pack and anti-inflammatories. "Strain's not too bad. Keep it iced, limit overhead work for 72 hours. You'll be fine." Martinez thanked him, and the three walked out into the California sunshine. Their perspective fundamentally shifted. That evening, Kale went for a run along the beach, her feet finding rhythm in the wet sand as the Pacific rolled in with its eternal indifference. She thought about the morning's incident, about how easily those candidates had dismissed her, and about how that same dismissal had followed her through 14 years of service. Not from everyone, not even from most people, but enough times that she'd learned to use it as an advantage, to let people underestimate her, and then show them who she really was when it mattered. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded her of tracer fire and flares, beauty and violence existing in the same moment. She joined the Navy at 18, desperate to escape a small town in West Virginia, where the biggest dream anyone had was working at the chemical plant or maybe getting a job at the state capitol. Her father had been a coal miner who died of black lung when she was 12, and her mother had worked 3 jobs to keep their house. Cale had wanted something more, something that mattered, and the Navy had offered that. Bud S had been hell, exactly as advertised. She'd been dropped from her first class during Hell Week, hypothermia taking her down during surf torture. The instructors had told her she'd given it a good shot, that not everyone was built for the teams, that she should be proud of how far she'd gotten. She'd listened politely, then rolled into the next class and finished. Green Team had been worse. The selection process for SEAL Team 6 was designed to break even experienced operators, to find the absolute best of an already elite group. She'd been the only woman in her assessment class, and the scrutiny had been intense. Every mistake magnified, every success questioned. But she'd passed, and then she'd deployed, and in the field, performance was the only thing that mattered. She stopped running, stood at the water's edge, and let the waves wash over her feet. Tomorrow she'd start preparing for the JSOC assignment. Tonight, she'd just be here in this moment, grateful for the path that had brought her to this beach. The flight to Virginia was uneventful. 5 hours in a military transport with uncomfortable seats and the constant drone of engines. Cale used the time to review the training materials JSOC had sent, studying Delta's new protocols and thinking about how to integrate NSW's approach. She'd brought Petty Officer First Class Emma Voss with her, a weapons specialist with a background in close-quarters marksmanship and a talent for breaking down complex techniques into teachable components. Voss was younger, maybe 28, with red hair usually hidden under a helmet and a dry sense of humor that made long deployments bearable. "You read the brief on Hatcher?" Voss asked, looking up from her own tablet. "Delta's golden boy, apparently. Youngest troop commander they've had in a decade." "That tells me he's good," Cale said. "They don't promote fast in that community unless you're exceptional, or politically connected. Delta doesn't care about politics. They care about performance." The transport began its descent, and through the small window, Cale could see the Virginia landscape spreading out below, all green forest and winding rivers. The facility they were heading to was technically classified, one of those places that didn't appear on maps, and where the security clearance requirements made most of JSOC look like open access. They landed, grabbed their gear, and were met by a staff sergeant who drove them in a nondescript SUV through several checkpoints to a compound that looked like a small college campus crossed with a military base. Modern buildings, training facilities, and an operations center that probably had more computing power than most Silicon Valley companies. Hatcher was waiting in the main briefing room, and Cale's first impression was that he looked younger than his file suggested. Maybe 35, with dark hair going gray at the temples and eyes that assessed without judgment. He stood as they entered, offered his hand. "Commander Cale, heard a lot about your work in Helmand." His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Captain Hatcher, looking forward to seeing what Delta's developed." They sat, and Hatcher pulled up a presentation on the large screen. The briefing lasted 2 hours, covering everything from explosive entry techniques to room-clearing patterns optimized for structures with reinforced walls and limited access points. Delta had been working on the problem of denied environments, places where traditional approaches failed because the architecture or defensive measures made conventional tactics ineffective. "We've integrated shaped charges with precision timing," Hatcher explained, highlighting a diagram. "The idea is to create simultaneous entry points that overwhelm defenders before they can react, but we need maritime expertise to adapt this for shipboarding scenarios and oil platform takedowns. Kale studied the diagrams, her mind already working through the variables. Ship superstructures are different from buildings. Metal walls, narrower corridors, vertical movement challenges. You breach wrong on a ship, you can compromise hull integrity or trigger secondary explosions from fuel or ammunition. Exactly why we need your input, Hatcher said. We're excellent at what we do on land, but maritime operations require different thinking. Voss leaned forward. What's your timeline for integration? Are we talking theoretical development or practical application? Practical. JSOC has intelligence suggesting a high-value target is moving weapons through a maritime network. If we get actionable intel, we might have a limited window to interdict. This training isn't academic. That changed the calculus. Kale had assumed this was long-term development, something that might get used in a year or two. But if there was an active intelligence picture, that meant potential real-world application within weeks or months. Show me your facilities, she said. I need to see what we're working with. Hatcher stood, gestured for them to follow. They walked through the compound to a building that looked unremarkable from the outside but opened into a massive training space. Inside was a full-scale mock-up of a ship's superstructure, complete with metal walls, narrow passageways, and multiple decks. Delta had spared no expense building an environment that perfectly replicated the challenges of maritime interdiction. This is impressive, Kale admitted, walking through the mock-up. The attention to detail was extraordinary, down to the rivets in the walls and the slight sway built into the floor to simulate ocean movement. We've run 50 iterations, Hatcher said. Different entry points, different team compositions, different scenarios. But our success rate on rescuing simulated hostages in the optimal time frame is only 60%. Too many variables we're not controlling. Kale climbed a ladder to the second deck, examined the corridor layout. Your entry points are all horizontal. You're thinking about this like a building, but on a ship you've got vertical access everywhere. Hatches, ventilation shafts, even the superstructure itself can be scaled. She turned to Voss. What do you think? Voss was already examining a bulkhead door. They're using standard breaching charges, but the blast is contained wrong. On a ship, you want directed energy, not dispersed. Otherwise, you risk injuring your own people in confined spaces. Hatcher listened carefully, not defensive, just absorbing information. That was a good sign. Some operators couldn't handle outside input, but Hatcher seemed genuinely interested in solving the problem. Can you demonstrate? He asked. Kale nodded. Give us 2 hours to prep and we'll run a full scenario using NSW methodology. Then we can compare approaches and see where integration makes sense. They spent the rest of the afternoon preparing, with Kale and Voss adapting their standard shipboarding techniques to Delta's facility. The SEAL approach emphasized speed and violence of action, but also precision, using climbing techniques to access multiple entry points simultaneously and coordinating fire so precisely that hostages could be extracted even from rooms with armed hostiles. At 1800 hours, they ran the demonstration. Kale led, with Voss on weapons and 2 Delta operators filling out the team to see the technique in practice. They approached the mock-up like a real target, using rope systems to scale the superstructure and access the top deck while simultaneously breaching the lower level. The coordination was perfect, ingrained by hundreds of real operations. Inside the mock-up, Kale moved with absolute certainty, her weapon up, scanning corners and clearing spaces with economy of movement that wasted no energy. Voss was right behind her, their spacing perfect, each covering the other's blind spots. They encountered simulated hostiles, engaged with precision fire, and reached the hostage room in 90 seconds. The door was reinforced, but instead of using a heavy charge, Voss placed a precision strip that cut through the locking mechanism without creating dangerous overpressure. They extracted the simulated hostages and exfilled in under 3 minutes total. Hatcher watched the whole thing on monitors, tracking their movement through the facility. When they emerged, he was nodding slowly. That's a 40% improvement over our best time, he said. And you did it with half the personnel. It's not about numbers, Kale explained, setting down her weapon. It's about angles and timing. You train your people to work as a single unit, which is effective. But maritime environments require smaller, more flexible teams that can adapt to changing conditions. They spent the next week integrating the approaches, with Delta operators learning SEAL techniques and SEALs adapting to Delta's precision timing. The collaboration was productive, both communities bringing different strengths to the problem. Kale found herself impressed by Delta's methodical approach, the way they analyzed every variable and refined techniques through systematic iteration. One evening, after a particularly challenging training day, Hatcher invited Kale to dinner at the facility's mess hall. It was quiet, most operators having finished eating earlier, and they sat in a corner booth with coffee that tasted like it had been brewed hours ago. "Can I ask you something?" Hatcher said. Kale nodded. "When you went through Bud S, how did you handle the isolation, being the only woman in your class the second time through?" It was a direct question, the kind most people danced around. Kale appreciated the honesty. "I didn't handle it well at first," she admitted. "I thought I had to prove something every day, that I had to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. That's exhausting. Eventually, I realized the only person I needed to prove anything to was myself. If I could meet my own standards, everyone else's opinions didn't matter." Hatcher considered that. "We had a female candidate in our selection last year. She was exceptional, probably would have made it through. But she dropped out after week 3, said the scrutiny was too much, that every mistake was magnified while every success was dismissed." "That's the reality," Kale said. "I'm not going to pretend it's easy or that the system's perfect, but if she was exceptional, the community lost someone valuable. That's the real tragedy." "Did you ever think about quitting?" Kale looked out the window at the darkening sky. "Every day during Hell Week, every day during Green Team, every day during my first deployment when I was the only woman on a 40-person task force, and I could feel people watching, waiting for me to fail." She turned back to Hatcher. "But quitting would have meant letting other people's limitations define my capabilities. I wasn't willing to do that." They talked for another hour, the conversation shifting from personal history to operational philosophy, from the challenges of leadership to the weight of making decisions that put people in harm's way. Kale learned that Hatcher had lost his first team member during an operation in Yemen, a failure of intelligence that put them in a building rigged with explosives. He still carried that, the weight of command and the knowledge that perfect planning couldn't eliminate risk. "How do you carry it?" he asked. "The responsibility." "You don't carry it alone," Kale said. "You trust your team, you make the best decisions you can with the information you have, and you learn from every mistake. But you also accept that in this business people die, sometimes despite your best efforts." The joint exercise was scheduled for week 3. A full mission profile using live ammunition and simulated hostages played by role players who'd been trained to react realistically. JSOC had constructed a scenario based on intelligence from the Maritime Weapons Network, a cargo ship in international waters, suspected of carrying high-value targets and chemical weapons components. The mission was to interdict, secure the cargo, and extract the targets without international incident. Kale would lead the maritime element, inserting via helicopter fast rope, while Hatcher commanded the support team providing overwatch and logistics. It was as close to real as training got, with failure measured not in scores but in simulated casualties and mission success criteria that mirrored actual operational standards. The night before the exercise, Kale checked her gear 3 times, a ritual she'd maintained since her first deployment. Every magazine seated properly, every piece of equipment secured, every contingency considered. Voss found her in the armory running through the same checks. "You nervous?" Voss asked. "Always am before something big, keeps me sharp." "You think Delta's ready for our approach?" Kale smiled. "I think they're about to see why NSW has the maritime mission, but they'll adapt. They always do." The exercise kicked off at 400, the team loading into helicopters while the target ship, actually a decommissioned cargo vessel, sat 3 miles offshore. The flight was short, the helicopter buffeted by coastal winds, and Kale felt the familiar pre-mission calm settle over her. This was what she trained for, what every hour in the gym and on the range had built toward. They fast-roped onto the deck in darkness, night vision turning the world green and ghostly. The ship was a maze of containers and machinery, exactly the kind of environment where things could go wrong fast. Kale's team split immediately, with half securing the upper deck while she led the assault element below. The corridors were narrow, just as they'd trained for, and the first contact came at a junction point where two hostiles appeared with weapons raised. Kale's rounds were precise, center mass, and the threats dropped before they could fire. Behind her, Voss and two Delta operators flowed into the space, their movements synchronized perfectly. They cleared 3 decks, encountering resistance that was professional and aggressive, role players who understood combat and didn't make it easy. The hostage room was deep in the ship's interior, behind a reinforced door that required precision breaching. Voss placed the charge, called the countdown, and the door blew inward with a focused crack that didn't create dangerous fragmentation. Inside, 2 hostiles stood over 3 bound hostages, weapons aimed. The geometry was terrible, no clean shots that didn't risk the hostages, but Kale had trained for this exact scenario 100 times. She moved left, drawing fire, while Voss came right with a precision shot that dropped the first hostile. The second swung his weapon toward Voss, and Kale fired, the round taking him in the shoulder, the simulated ammunition marking the hit. The hostages were secured, zip ties cut, and the team exfilled through a route they'd pre-planned, reaching the extraction point in 4 minutes. Helicopters came in low, and they lifted off while Hatcher's support team provided suppressive fire against remaining hostiles. The whole operation, from insertion to extraction, took 11 minutes. After-action review was held in a conference room with senior JSOC leadership watching via secure video. The mission had been recorded from multiple angles, every movement captured for analysis. Hatcher walked through the timeline, highlighting decision points and execution quality. The integration worked, he concluded. NSW's vertical approach combined with our precision timing created overlapping fields of fire that neutralized threats faster than either method alone could achieve. A colonel from JSOC's Operations Directorate spoke up on the screen. "Commander Kale, your team's performance was exceptional, but I'm concerned about scalability. Can this approach work with operators who haven't cross-trained?" Kale stood, clicked through to a different slide she'd prepared. "Techniques we used are based on principles, not specific skills. Any qualified CQB operator can learn the vertical access methods in 2 weeks of dedicated training. The precision shooting petty officer Voss demonstrated is more specialized, but Delta already has equivalent capabilities in their personnel. What we've really done is create a common language for maritime interdiction that lets different units work together seamlessly." She pulled up footage from the hostage room breach. "Here you can see the decision tree that led to our approach. Traditional tactics would have used flashbangs and overwhelming force, but in a confined space with unknown materials on board, that risks secondary explosions. Instead, we used movement to create angles, trusting our marksmanship and each other's positioning." The briefing continued for 90 minutes, dissecting every aspect of the operation. By the end, JSOC had approved the integrated approach for inclusion in the Special Operations curriculum, and Kale's techniques would be taught across the community. As they filed out of the briefing room, Hatcher caught up with her. "That was masterful. The way you explained the decision-making process, you made it seem simple." "It is simple," Kale said. "We just make it complicated by overthinking. See the problem, apply the principle, execute with precision. Everything else is noise." They walked outside where the Virginia afternoon was warm and humid, cicadas singing in the trees. Voss was already loading gear into the SUV for the trip back to the airfield. "You changed how we think about maritime operations," Hatcher said. "That's not a small thing." Kale shrugged. "You would have figured it out eventually. We just accelerated the timeline." "Take the compliment, Commander. You earned it." She smiled, nodded. "Then thank you. Your team's professionalism made the integration possible. Not every community would be that open to outside input." They shook hands, and Kale climbed into the SUV. As they drove away from the facility, Voss glanced over. "Think they'll actually implement everything we showed them?" she asked. "They will," Kale said with certainty. "JSOC doesn't waste time on theater. If they approved it, they're already building training packages." Back at Coronado 2 days later, Kale settled into the rhythm of command again, overseeing her team's training cycle and preparing for an upcoming deployment to the Pacific Theater. But word of her work with Delta had spread through the NSW community, and she found herself fielding questions from other commanders about integration techniques and cross-community training. One afternoon, she was called to the squadron commander's office. Captain Riker looked serious, which usually meant something significant was developing. "Close the door," he said. She did, then sat across from his desk. "JSOC wants to activate the Maritime Interdiction Package," Riker said without preamble. "The weapons network we briefed on went active. Intelligence has a specific ship, specific timeline, and the window is 72 hours. Kale felt her pulse quicken, the shift from training to operational reality. "What's the target profile?" "High-value individual suspected of coordinating arms shipments to designated terrorist organizations. He's on a container ship currently in the South China Sea, heading toward Indonesia. The ship's flagged under a convenience registry which gives us legal authority to interdict in international waters, but the political sensitivity is extreme. We need clean execution, zero casualties among non-combatants, and absolute precision." "What's the package?" "You'll lead the maritime element. Delta's providing support and logistics. Hatcher specifically requested you for command." Riker slid a folder across the desk. "Full briefs here. You've got 12 hours to build your team and prep for insertion. Wheels up tomorrow at 600. Kale opened the folder, scanned the intelligence summary. The target was a known arms dealer named Qasim Ahmadi, Iranian national with connections to multiple extremist groups. The ship, MV Fortuna, was a mid-sized container vessel with a crew of 23 and an unknown number of security personnel protecting Ahmadi. Intelligence suggested he was traveling with chemical weapons components hidden in legitimate cargo, making the interdiction both a counterterrorism operation and a non-proliferation mission. "Rules of engagement?" Kale asked. "Weapons tight unless fired upon or imminent threat to hostages is identified. Priority 1 is securing Ahmadi alive. Priority 2 is securing the chemical components. Priority 3 is ensuring crew safety." Those priorities told Kale everything about the mission's complexity. Taking someone alive was always harder than elimination, especially when they were protected by armed security in a confined environment. "I'll need Voss on weapons, Chief Warrant Officer Kim for technical support, and at least 4 more operators with maritime interdiction experience. Take who you need." JSOC's cleared unlimited resources. Kale stood, folder in hand. "I'll have the team brief ready by 2000 hours. "One more thing," Riker said. "This operation is getting White House oversight. The National Security Advisor will be in the Operations Center during execution. No pressure, but the entire Special Operations community's reputation is riding on this." "Understood, sir." She left the office and immediately pulled out her phone, sending encrypted messages to her team. Within 20 minutes, 8 operators were assembled in the secure planning facility, and Kale was walking them through the intelligence picture. The room was windowless, walls covered in screens displaying satellite imagery, deck plans of the MV Fortuna, and real-time tracking data showing the ship's current position. "This is a direct action mission with strategic implications," Kale began. "We insert via helicopter, fast rope to the deck, secure the target, and exfil with 0 international incident. Any questions before we dive into details?" Chief Kim, a quiet technical expert who'd been with NSW for 16 years, raised his hand. "What's the crew disposition? Are they complicit or victims?" "Intelligence assesses most crew as unaware of Ahmadi's true purpose. They think they're running legitimate cargo, but the captain and first mate are likely paid to look the other way. We treat everyone as potentially hostile but don't engage unless threatened." Voss pulled up the deck plans. "Entry points are limited. The superstructure has three primary access routes, but Ahmadi's likely in the captain's quarters, which are central and defensible. If his security is competent, they'll have set up choke points. Kale nodded. Which is why we're using the approach we developed with Delta. Multiple simultaneous entry points, vertical access, precision timing. We overwhelm their defensive positions before they can consolidate. They spent 6 hours planning, wargaming scenarios, identifying contingencies. By midnight, they had 3 different mission profiles depending on variables like weather, crew resistance, and Ahmadi's exact location. Every operator knew their role, their backup, and their backup's backup. At 200, Kale finally allowed herself to sleep, setting an alarm for 4:30. She lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the variables they couldn't control. Intelligence could be wrong. Ahmadi might have more security than expected. The weather could deteriorate. Any one of 100 things could go sideways. But that was the nature of special operations. You planned for everything, then adapted when reality proved different. The flight to the forward operating location was aboard a C-17, the team sleeping in uncomfortable seats while their gear was secured in the cargo bay. They landed at a classified facility on a Pacific island that officially didn't host U.S. military operations, and transferred to helicopters that would take them to the ship. The brief from JSOC's Operations Center came through on secure satellite communications. The MV Fortuna was 12 hours from Indonesian territorial waters. If they didn't interdict soon, the political complications would multiply exponentially. We're greenlit, Kale told her team. Insertion in 30 minutes. Final equipment check. The helicopter ride was tense, everyone silent, running through mental rehearsals of their roles. Kale looked at each face, seeing the concentration, the controlled adrenaline. These were professionals who'd done this dozens of times, but every mission carried risk, and complacency killed operators faster than enemy fire. The MV Fortuna appeared on the horizon, a rust-streaked container ship that looked like 1,000 others plying the world's shipping lanes. Intelligence had confirmed Ahmadi was still aboard, tracked through electronic signals intelligence. The ship's crew had no idea what was about to happen. 30 seconds, the pilot announced. Kale stood, gripped the fast rope, felt the helicopter slow and hover. Below, the deck was a maze of containers and machinery, no obvious landing zones. This would be precision insertion, threading between obstacles in darkness with rotor wash creating turbulence. Go, the crew chief said. Kale dropped, the rope burning through her gloves, and landed on the deck in a crouch. Around her, the team descended like shadows, fanning out immediately to secure the initial foothold. 2 crew members appeared, startled, and were secured with zip ties and moved to a safe location. No shots fired, no alarm raised. They moved toward the superstructure, and that's when the first indication of trouble emerged. A door opened on the second deck, and 3 armed men appeared, not crew but professional security in tactical gear. They saw the team and opened fire immediately, the distinctive crack of AK-pattern rifles echoing across the deck. Kale's team responded instantly, finding cover behind containers and returning precision fire. 2 security personnel dropped, the third retreated into the superstructure, and suddenly the mission complexity had escalated. Alpha, report, Kale said into her radio. Chief Kim's voice came back. Second team in position. We've got movement on the bridge, at least 4 additional hostiles identified. The plan had accounted for security, but not this level of organization. Ahmadi had brought a professional protective detail, which meant he'd anticipated potential interdiction. That changed the tactical picture significantly. Execute vertical access now, Kale ordered. We need to get inside before they consolidate defensive positions. Voss and 2 operators broke right, heading for a maintenance ladder that would give them access to the upper decks. Kale led the main element forward, using suppressive fire to keep the security team from establishing effective fields of fire. The narrow corridors of the superstructure became a close-quarters battle, every corner a potential ambush point. Kale's training took over, muscle memory and countless repetitions translating into smooth movement. She cleared a junction, saw a hostile bringing a weapon to bear and fired twice. The man dropped. Behind her, an operator named Santos took a round to his armor plate, the impact knocking him back but not penetrating. He rolled back to cover, breathing hard but functional. "I'm good," he gasped. "Keep moving." They reached the central corridor leading to the captain's quarters, and that's when the barricade became visible. The security team had stacked furniture and equipment, creating a defensive position that covered the entire hallway. Behind it, at least 3 shooters had interlocking fields of fire. Traditional assault would be a bloodbath. "Voss status," Kale said into her radio. "In position on deck 3. I've got angle on the barricade from above. On my mark, suppressive fire through the overhead. We're breaching from below." It was the technique they'd practiced in Virginia, using 3-dimensional access to create angles that negated defensive positions. Kale counted down, and Voss fired through the thin deck plating, her rounds precisely placed to force the security team to abandon their position. Simultaneously, Kale's element breached through a maintenance hatch below the corridor, coming up behind the barricade. The security team found themselves caught between 2 fires, their defensive advantage eliminated. The firefight lasted 20 seconds, intense and brutal, and when it ended, all 3 security personnel were down. The corridor was clear. Kale reached the captain's quarters, found the door reinforced and locked. Chief Kim placed a precision charge, the kind that would breach without creating dangerous fragmentation, and called the countdown. The door blew inward and Kale entered, weapon up, scanning. The room was empty except for one man sitting calmly at a desk, hands visible, no weapon in reach. Qasim Ahmadi looked exactly like his intelligence photos. Mid-50s, graying beard, expensive suit that seemed absurd on a cargo ship. His eyes held no fear, just calculation. "Commander Kale," he said in perfect English, "I've been expecting someone like you." That stopped her cold. How did he know her name? "You're under arrest for arms trafficking and weapons proliferation," she said, maintaining weapon discipline. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Ahmadi smiled. "Of course. But before your people secure the ship, you should know that the chemical components you're looking for aren't in the cargo hold. They're in the crew quarters, rigged to disperse if tampered with. If your team isn't very, very careful, you'll kill everyone aboard." Kale's mind raced. Was he bluffing? Intelligence hadn't mentioned chemical dispersal systems, but Ahmadi's confidence suggested he was telling the truth, and the risk of calling that bluff was unacceptable. "Chief, hold position," she said into her radio. "Possible chemical hazard in crew quarters. Nobody enters until we verify." She looked at Ahmadi. "You're going to tell me exactly how to safely secure those components. And if you're lying, things will get very unpleasant for you." "I don't doubt that," Ahmadi said. "But I'm not lying. The system is automated, motion-triggered. If anyone enters the crew quarters without first disabling the mechanism, Nerve Agent will flood the compartment. You have maybe 30 crew members sleeping 15 feet from death." This was exactly the kind of complication that turned successful missions into disasters. Kale made a decision. "You're going to walk me through the disarming procedure, step by step. And if anything you say is incorrect, if there's any indication of deception, I will personally ensure you face every consequence available under international law." Ahmadi nodded slowly. "The control panel is in the engine room. I'll need my hands free to access it." Every instinct told Kale this was a trap, but every second they delayed increased the risk that crew members would wake up and wander into a death trap. She made a hand signal, and Santos moved forward, secured Ahmadi with flex cuffs that allowed limited hand movement but prevented any aggressive action. "Lead the way," Kale said. "And remember, I've got 8 highly trained operators on this ship. If this is an ambush, it ends badly for you." They moved through the corridors, Ahmadi walking calmly with Kale's weapon trained on his back. The engine room was hot and loud, machinery thrumming with the ship's power systems. Ahmadi led them to a panel hidden behind a maintenance access plate. "The mechanism is simple," he explained, opening the panel to reveal a circuit board and several wired components. "This relay needs to be disconnected, then the timer disabled. If you do it in the wrong order, the system triggers immediately." Chief Kim moved forward, examining the setup with a practiced eye. "It's legitimate," he confirmed. And it's sophisticated, military-grade dispersal system. If this triggers, the nerve agent will be aerosolized through the ventilation. Everyone in the crew quarters dies in minutes. Kale felt the weight of command pressing down. Can you disable it? Yes, but it'll take time, maybe 20 minutes if I'm careful. Do it. While Kim worked, Kale called in a situation report to JSOC. The operations center, 12,000 miles away, went silent as she described the chemical threat. Finally, a voice she recognized as the National Security Advisor spoke. Commander, what's your assessment of success probability? Chief Kim is the best technical operator in NSW. If anyone can disable this safely, it's him, but I won't lie and say it's certain. Understood. Proceed with extreme caution. The President is being briefed now. No pressure, Kale thought. Just the President of the United States watching her team try to prevent a chemical weapons disaster on a civilian ship in international waters. Kim worked with absolute focus, his hands steady despite the stakes. He traced circuits, tested connections, and slowly began disassembling the dispersal mechanism. Kale watched Ahmadi, saw the man's calm facade starting to crack. He thought this would buy him leverage, maybe even escape. But he was realizing that Kale wasn't interested in negotiation. Why? She asked him. Why build this? You had to know we'd eventually find you. Ahmadi met her eyes. Because in my world, Commander, leverage is survival. I have information your government wants. Names, networks, financial structures. This was insurance. You miscalculated. We don't negotiate with terrorists. Everyone negotiates eventually. Not today. Kim called out. I've got the relay disconnected. Moving to the timer now. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Kale's life. She stood in a hot engine room on a ship in the middle of the Pacific, weapon-trained on an arms dealer, while one of her operators carefully prevented a chemical weapons catastrophe. Finally, Kim straightened. It's done. Systems disabled. The nerve agent's still present, but it's inert now. CBRN team can secure it safely. Kale felt relief wash over her but didn't let it show. Good work, Chief. Voss, status on the rest of the ship. All crew secured, no casualties. We've got 3 wounded security personnel in custody, 4 KIA. The chemical components are exactly where Ahmadi said they'd be. Secure everything for transport. We're exfilling in 15. They brought Ahmadi to the deck, where helicopters were already inbound. The operation had taken 47 minutes from insertion to mission complete, but it felt like hours. As they lifted off, Kale looked back at the MV Fortuna, now crawling with CBRN specialists in protective gear, carefully securing the chemical weapons components. The debrief at the forward operating location was extensive, with senior leadership from JSOC, the State Department, and the intelligence community participating via secure video. Ahmadi had been transferred to federal custody, and his information was already being exploited to map the weapons network he'd operated. Commander Kale, the National Security Advisor said, the President asked me to convey his personal thanks. Your team prevented what could have been a catastrophic international incident. Thank you, sir. My team executed flawlessly under extremely challenging conditions. Your calm under pressure, particularly in managing the chemical threat, was exceptional. The President is recommending you for the Defense Distinguished Service Medal. Kale felt uncomfortable with the praise. She'd just done her job, the mission her team had trained for, but she understood the political dimension, the need to recognize success publicly. I'm honored, sir, but every member of my team deserves recognition. Without Chief Kim's technical expertise, we'd have had a very different outcome. The debrief continued, analyzing every decision point, every tactical choice. The integration with Delta's methodology was cited as key to the mission's success, and JSOC formally approved expanding the cross-training program to all special missions units. When it finally ended, Kale walked out into the tropical night, feeling the exhaustion hit. Voss found her sitting on the tarmac, looking up at stars that seemed impossibly bright this far from civilization. You did good today, ma'am, Voss said, sitting down beside her. We all did. That's what makes this work. Nobody's a hero alone. Still, the way you handled Ahmadi, the chemical threat, that was command presence at its finest. Kale smiled. I was terrified the whole time, just didn't show it. That's the job. They sat in comfortable silence, two operators who just completed a mission that would remain classified for decades, that would never appear in newspapers or history books. The world would never know how close a cargo ship came to becoming a chemical weapons catastrophe, or how a small team of professionals had prevented it. Back at Coronado a week later, the squadron held a quiet recognition ceremony. No media, no public fanfare, just the NSW community acknowledging exceptional performance. Kale received her medal, gave a short speech about teamwork and preparation, and then the community moved on to the next mission, the next training cycle. But something had shifted. Word spread through the special operations community about the maritime interdiction, about Kale's leadership under impossible pressure. She started receiving requests to speak at professional development seminars, to advise on training programs, to mentor junior officers navigating their own paths through the community. She was careful about accepting, not wanting to become a professional speaker instead of an operator. But she recognized the opportunity to influence the next generation, to show them that competence and character mattered more than politics or appearances. One afternoon, she was approached by Martinez, Duchesne, and Park, the three candidates who confronted her in the gym months earlier. They'd completed Bud S, passed their initial qualifications, and were now awaiting team assignments. "Ma'am," Martinez said, his Texas accent subdued by respect, "we wanted to apologize again for our conduct, and to thank you." "Thank me for what?" Kale asked. "For teaching us that lesson. It changed how we approach everything. We spent the rest of training watching, assessing, never assuming, and it made us better operators." Duchesne nodded. "Our class instructors used your techniques in the CQB package, the vertical access approaches, the precision timing. They told us it came from you." "It came from a lot of people," Kale corrected. "I just helped integrate methodologies, but I'm glad it's being taught." "Every tool you have makes you more capable." Park, who'd been quiet, spoke up. "Can I ask you something personal, ma'am?" Kale nodded. "During Bud S, when things got hard, how did you keep going? What was the thought that got you through?" Kale considered the question. It deserved a real answer, not a platitude. "I thought about all the people who believed I couldn't. Every person who dismissed me, who thought I was wasting everyone's time, who assumed I'd quit. I thought about proving them wrong, not because I needed their validation, but because I knew what I was capable of, and I refused to let their limitations define me." She looked at each of them. "You'll face your own versions of that. Moments when it seems easier to quit, when people question your abilities, when you question yourself. The thing that gets you through is knowing your own standards and refusing to accept anything less from yourself." They thanked her and left, and Kale thought about how far those three had come. From arrogant candidates to professional operators, humbled by experience and strengthened by adversity. That evening, she received a call from Hatcher. Delta was running another training evolution, this time focused on mountain warfare in denied environments, and they wanted NSW input on altitude operations. "You interested in freezing your ass off in the Rockies?" Hatcher asked. Kale laughed. "When do we start?" The mountain training took place in Colorado, at altitude that made every movement feel like running through honey. The integration went smoothly, both communities learning from each other, refining techniques that would save lives in future operations. Kale found herself thinking about the trajectory of her career, how each experience built on the last, how every challenge had prepared her for the next. She joined the Navy to escape a small town, found her calling in special operations, and now was helping shape how the entire community approached complex problems. One night, sitting around a fire at the mountain facility, Hatcher asked her about legacy. "What do you want people to remember about your career?" he said. Kale stared into the flames, thinking. "I don't want to be remembered as the first woman to do X or Y. I want to be remembered as someone who did the job well, who made the team better, and who left things improved for the next generation. Gender shouldn't be the story. Competence should be." "That's exactly what people will remember," Hatcher said. "The operators you've trained, the missions you've led, the techniques you've developed. That's legacy." The training concluded successfully, and Kale returned to Coronado to find her promotion orders waiting. She was being advanced to captain, with command of a full squadron. It was the pinnacle of her career, the position she'd worked toward for nearly 2 decades. The promotion ceremony was held on the beach, the same stretch of sand where she'd run countless miles, where she'd processed the ups and downs of her career. As she stood before the assembled community, accepting the new rank, she thought about the path that had led here. From a coal mining town in West Virginia to command of a Navy SEAL squadron. From being told she'd never make it through Bud S to developing techniques taught across the special operations community. From being underestimated and dismissed to earning respect through performance and character. Her mother was in the audience, having flown out from West Virginia. They'd not always had an easy relationship, the distance of deployments and the classified nature of her work creating gaps in understanding. But her mother had always supported her, had worked those 3 jobs to give her daughter opportunities she'd never had. After the ceremony, they walked along the beach together. "Your father would be proud," her mother said quietly. "He always said you had steel in you. He'd have loved to see you wearing captain's bars." Kale felt emotion tighten her throat. Her father had died when she was 12 before he could see what she'd become, but his influence was there in her work ethic, in her refusal to accept limitations, in her understanding that dignity came from doing difficult things well. "I wish he could have seen it," she said. "He did, honey. Maybe not in person, but he saw it. Everything you've become, it started with the lessons he taught you. About not quitting, about meeting your obligations, about taking pride in work well done." They stood at the water's edge, watching the Pacific roll in with its eternal rhythm. Kale thought about all the operations she'd run, all the people she'd served with, all the moments of fear and triumph that had defined her career. And she thought about the future, about the operators she'd lead, about the missions still ahead. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Kale felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not for the recognition or the rank, but for the opportunity to serve, to be part of something larger than herself, to work alongside professionals who embodied the best of human capability. Her call sign, Raptor, had been earned in combat, in a moment when she'd pulled wounded teammates to safety under fire. But it represented more than that single action. It represented the Predator's focus, the ability to see clearly in chaos, the precision to strike when necessary, and the discipline to hold when appropriate. She'd carried that call sign through 14 years of operations, through missions in 14 countries, through moments of triumph and tragedy. As the ceremony wound down and people dispersed, Kale found herself approached by a young ensign fresh out of the Naval Academy who'd been assigned to the squadron. The woman looked nervous but determined. "Ma'am, I'm Ensign Rachel Reeves. I'm reporting for duty." Kale shook her hand, saw the mix of excitement and anxiety in the young officer's eyes. She remembered being that person 20 years ago, stepping into a world she didn't fully understand but was determined to navigate. "Welcome aboard, Ensign. First piece of advice, find someone you trust and learn everything you can from them. This community rewards those who listen more than those who talk." "Yes, ma'am. I was hoping, if you have time, that I could learn from you. Your career, everything you've accomplished, it's exactly the path I want to follow." Kale felt the weight of mentorship settle on her shoulders. This young officer was looking at her the way she'd once looked at senior operators, seeking guidance and inspiration. It was a responsibility she took seriously. "We'll make time," she said. "But understand, the path isn't easy. You'll be tested in ways you can't imagine. People will doubt you, will question whether you belong. Your job isn't to convince them. Your job is to meet your own standards and let your performance speak." Reeves nodded, absorbing the words. "I understand, ma'am. I'm ready." "Good. Report to the operations officer tomorrow at 700. We'll get you integrated into the team." As Reeves walked away, Voss appeared at Kale's side. "Another one looking to follow in your footsteps." "That's how it works," Kale said. "We all stood on someone's shoulders. Now it's our turn to be the shoulders." The weeks that followed were intense, with Kale settling into her new command role while maintaining her operational edge. She ran with her squadron, trained with them, and made it clear that rank didn't exempt her from the physical and mental demands of the job. Her leadership style was direct but fair, demanding excellence while recognizing that people had limits, and sometimes those limits needed to be respected. She implemented new training protocols based on lessons learned from the maritime interdiction, emphasizing adaptability and cross-community integration. Her squadron became known as a testing ground for innovative techniques, a place where conventional wisdom was challenged and new approaches were validated through rigorous evaluation. One morning, 6 months into her command, she received a call from JSOC. Another mission was developing, this one in East Africa, requiring maritime capabilities and precision execution. The target was a terrorist cell operating from a coastal stronghold, and the mission would require everything Kale had learned over her career. She assembled her team, walked them through the intelligence, and began planning. This was what they did, what they'd trained for. The mission would be dangerous, the stakes high, but they were ready. As they worked through the tactical problems, finding solutions to seemingly impossible challenges, Kale felt a deep satisfaction. This was where she belonged, leading professionals who trusted each other and understood that their mission mattered. The operation launched 3 weeks later, a night insertion via small boats followed by an overland movement to the target compound. The firefight was brief but intense, and when it ended, the terrorist cell had been neutralized and valuable intelligence had been secured. Zero friendly casualties, minimal collateral damage, textbook execution. In the after-action review, a young operator named Thompson asked Kale how she stayed calm during the most intense moments. "Training," she said simply. "When you've done something 1,000 times, when you trust your teammates absolutely, when you've thought through every contingency, the actual operation becomes almost routine. The fear doesn't go away, but it becomes manageable, just another variable to account for." Thompson nodded, but Kale could see he wanted more. "The truth is," she continued, "calm isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to act despite fear, to trust your training and your team more than you trust your anxiety. That's something you build over years, through repetition and experience." As her first year of command drew to a close, Kale was invited to speak at the Naval Academy's Leadership Symposium. She stood before a room full of midshipmen, young men and women at the beginning of their journeys, and talked about her career with brutal honesty. She discussed her failures, the times she'd been dropped from Bud S, the moments she'd questioned whether she belonged, the operations that hadn't gone as planned. But she also talked about resilience, about learning from failure, about the importance of surrounding yourself with people who made you better. "Leadership isn't about being the smartest or the strongest," she told them. "It's about creating conditions where your team can perform at their best. It's about making hard decisions with incomplete information and living with the consequences. It's about understanding that your job is to serve those you lead, not to be served by them." The questions came fast, and Kale answered each one thoughtfully. A female midshipman asked about dealing with institutional bias, and Kale didn't sugarcoat her response. "It exists. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying or hasn't been paying attention, but you can't let it define you or limit you. You control your effort, your preparation, your performance. Focus on what you can control, excel at it, and let the results speak for themselves." The symposium ended with a standing ovation, but Kale felt uncomfortable with the attention. She wasn't there to be celebrated, but to share hard-won lessons that might help the next generation avoid mistakes she'd made. Flying back to Coronado, she reflected on how far she'd come from that first day at Bud S, when instructors had looked at her with skepticism and fellow candidates had questioned why she was there. She'd proven herself through actions, not words, through performance that spoke louder than any argument could. Her phone buzzed with a message from Hatcher. "Heard your academy talk was incredible. When you retire from NSW, we should write the book on special operations integration. The community needs it." She smiled, typed back, "If I ever retire, this job has a way of keeping you hooked." The truth was, she couldn't imagine doing anything else. This life, with its demands and dangers, its triumphs and tragedies, was who she'd become. She'd found her purpose pulling wounded teammates through hostile fire in Helmand Province, and every day since had reinforced that this was where she belonged. Back at the squadron, she found Reeves waiting with an update on training schedules. The young ensign had proven herself capable and hungry to learn, absorbing knowledge like a sponge, and pushing herself to meet standards that many thought unrealistic. "Ma'am, I wanted to thank you," Reeves said. "For what? For showing what's possible, for not making it seem easy but showing that it's achievable with the right effort and mindset. You've changed how I think about my career." Kale put a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing that yourself. I'm just here to provide guidance. Your success or failure is determined by your choices, your effort, your character. Own that and you'll go far in this community." As Reeves left, Kale thought about legacy again. Not the medals or the rank, but the operators she'd influenced, the techniques she'd developed, the standards she'd maintained. Years from now, when she was long retired and some new generation of operators was pushing boundaries she couldn't imagine, would they remember her name? Probably not. But they might use techniques she'd helped develop, might benefit from standards she'd upheld, might inherit a community made slightly better by her service. That would be enough. That evening, she went for a run on the beach, her feet finding familiar rhythm in the sand. The sun was setting again, as it did every day, painting the sky in those same shades of orange and purple. But tonight, watching that sunset, Kale felt something she'd rarely allowed herself: contentment. Not satisfaction, which implied completion, but contentment with the journey, with the choices she'd made, with the person she'd become. She thought about the 3 Bud S candidates who'd cornered her in the gym, who'd learned in 45 seconds what she'd spent 14 years proving: that assumptions were dangerous, that competence transcended gender, and that the most dangerous opponents were the ones who looked unassuming until the moment they demonstrated exactly who they were. She thought about Martinez, Duchesne, and Park, now professional operators carrying forward lessons learned from that encounter. She thought about Ensign Reeves, embarking on a similar journey with different challenges ahead. She thought about every person she'd served with, everyone who'd trusted her with their lives, everyone who'd pushed her to be better. The sky darkened, stars appearing one by one, and Kale turned back toward the base. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to prove that excellence was the only standard that mattered. She'd spent her career being underestimated, and she'd spent her career proving those estimates wrong. Not through argument or advocacy, but through performance that spoke louder than words ever could. "Remember who I am," she thought, recalling the title of this story that someone would tell someday. Not a boast, but a statement of fact. A reminder that competence earned through sacrifice and dedication created an identity that no assumption could diminish. She was Commander Vesper Kale, call sign Raptor, and 45 seconds in a gymnasium had taught 3 recruits what the world would eventually learn. She was exactly who she'd proven herself to be through 14 years of service in the hardest communities the military had to offer. And that identity, earned through countless hours of training, through missions in 14 countries, through moments of fear and triumph, was something no one could take away. The gymnasium where it started was empty now, but somewhere other young operators were learning similar lessons, making similar mistakes, and hopefully finding similar resolve. The cycle continued, generation after generation, each building on the last, each pushing the boundaries of what was possible. Kale smiled, picked up her pace, and ran toward whatever came next, because that's what operators did. They adapted, they overcame, and they never stopped moving forward. The story that began with 3 recruits cornering someone they didn't recognize had become something larger, a testament to the power of proving yourself through action, of maintaining standards when challenged, and of remembering that true strength required no announcement. It simply was, evident in every decision, every action, every moment of pressure turned into opportunity. And as the stars wheeled overhead and the Pacific whispered its eternal song, Commander Vesper Kale carried that truth forward into whatever missions awaited, whatever challenges needed facing, whatever lessons needed teaching. She was ready. She'd always been ready. That's what 45 seconds had taught 3 recruits, and what 14 years had proven to everyone who'd ever doubted. Remember who I am indeed, not a threat but a promise. A reminder that competence, character, and courage would always transcend assumptions, would always speak louder than prejudice, and would always define those who earned the right to wear the trident and lead others into the hardest missions America asked its warriors to undertake. The end.